All right. Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you today from the ocean. My name is Maya Pelletier. I work for the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, and we're super excited to welcome you today to our live virtual field trip. So we are out, quite literally out on the water right now filming this. So if you get any kind of background stuff going on, it's because we're in the wind and the waves. This is part of a effort to help get as many people as we can to see how awesome seaweed farming is. So we're really excited. And as we're going through this, I know some of you may have questions. So if you have questions, feel free to put things into the chat through the question and answer feature. And we will ask the questions during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my amazing colleagues who have been throwing things behind me in the introduction because they are having so much fun already. Ken Sparta and Jaclyn Robidoux. So here they are, and they're going to take it away.
Hey, all.
So this is Jax and I'm Ken. And what do you do again?
What do I do again? So my name is Jaclyn Robidoux, or friends call me Jax. I work for Maine Sea Grant. I am our seaweed extension specialist. So that means that I work with seaweed farmers, harvesters, businesses, researchers all over the coast of Maine on seaweed farming. So excited to be here today. And this is Ken.
Hi, I'm Ken Sparta. I own a company called Spartan Sea Farms. And primarily we grow both kelp and then also oysters in Freeport. But today we're here on the Damascotta River because I'm up here harvesting kelp for a friend, and it's beautiful kelp. I thought we'd show that to you today. Plus the boat was here, and it's a long ride to Freeport. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think our plan for the next section here is we're going to talk about how we farm kelp, where we are, what some of the things we do with kelp. And then answer some of y'all's questions. So, Ken, do you want to give us a rundown of where we are? I know you said we're on the Damascotta, but what are we looking at here?
We're in Clark's Cove. This is actually one of the first kelp farms in the state of Maine. We've been doing it for a few years now, but not all that many. It doesn't seem like all that many to me. You guys, it's maybe your lifetime. But if we look down, we can see kelp that's growing right to the surface. So what we do is we grow that kelp like 5 to 7 feet below the surface of the water. And that's where we'd like it to be right now because it's got these beautiful stipes, which, are filled with air. It's floating. So that's why it's time to harvest it now. There's a big mooring, a big anchor at that end. And then down at this other end that is behind the camera, there's another anchor, and that line goes, in this case, 800 feet, and each one of those feet right now is yielding 8 to 9 pounds of kelp, which is delicious food. The other part of my life, I also have a company that just recently started that makes a veggie burger that's primarily kelp based, but there's lots of amazing kelp food out there. I eat it all the time, probably more than I should. But anyways.
Yeah, so it's pretty heavy, right? You said like 8 to 9 pounds per foot. And I don't know, is this the point where we should show you guys the kelp curtain so we can start talking about
absolutely.
How much kelp we're actually growing? So, Ken, when do you put the kelp in the water to start with?
So we get our seed and we grow our seed.
On and on.
we get our seed. And we try to have our seed ready in October, November, and we put it out onto this big thick line is a grow line, and then I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's a skinny line that's actually it's upholstery twine. They make it when they make furniture, and that's what our seed starts in. And then as the seed grows, these chunks, which look kind of like roots, but they're not. They're called holdfasts. Go ahead and they adhere right onto the line. And from those holdfasts comes the stipe, which is like a stem, almost like the trunk of a tree. And it continues on out to the favorite bit, which is the blade.
Tasty.
Very yummy.
Very tasty.
Not that you can't eat.
Stipes are good.
The stipes are very good. Make very good pickles. And they grow throughout the year. So we're going to put these in the water in November. And here we are. Is this May Day or are we a day after May Day? Right in there someplace. May
May
1st, second.
1st.
May
Today.
1st, yeah.
Yeah, so it's May Day.
May.
Perfect day for kelp harvest. It's
Mhm.
actually part of Seaweed Week, which we can talk about later. But
Yeah.
So it's a not unlike a farm crop. It grows in 1 year. My oysters take 3 years, so it's kind of nice to have this crop that we circulate through just in one season.
So the kelp is going from being microscopic, right? Like teeny, teeny, tiny. And if you came out to the farm in October, November, all that you would see is really just these like bare lines.
Yep.
And now 6 months, 7 months later, all this kelp. It's about seven-month old kelp.
Yep.
It's looking really good. Why? I think something that people might be curious about, why are we harvesting in spring? Why is spring the big harvest season for kelp?
Well, we let this grow further, but as the water warms, there's lots of other things. This is great habitat, which is wonderful for the creatures that might want to grow on it, but not for those of us that are bigger creatures that want to eat it. So we'd hate to have like snails might lay their eggs on here, or there would be other creatures that would come and take up residence. So we like to get it before then. There's actually, if we look hard enough, I'm sure that we'll find a couple of spots. And then also,
Kind of see at the end there.
yeah, we were talking about how we'd like the kelp to be down in the water, not on the surface of the water. Kelp gets sunburnt just like we do. And then this is dead. So instead of being this nice pliable thing, it's actually this thing that just breaks off. And that's what we do as we harvest it. We'll throw that away. So that's stuff that we've grown that we can't sell. And ultimately, for me to make money, I have to get this seed, go from that seed, that little tiny seed, to these big honking pieces of seaweed. And then the hardest part of my job, the thing that requires the most effort, is all this stuff needs to be cut off, put into a bag, and brought to market. So that's what I'll be doing next week if anybody wants to come help.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kelp. So how many pounds of kelp do you think are on this farm when it's fully loaded?
I think that we will probably pull, including the stipes, which is significant, we probably have about 9,000 pounds on this one farm.
That's a lot of kelp.
Hey,
But-
Ken, what's a stipe?
It's this awesome stemmy thing. You want one?
Sure.
They're good to eat. Yep. They are absolutely delicious.
So you can eat every part of the kelp, which is kind of cool. And
This is a good straw.
we use the stipes for different things than we use the blades for. Should talk about that.
So the stipes process differently, but as you can see, it's like kind of like a green bean. So I actually have a bar in Freeport and a bar restaurant, and we like to serve these as pickles. So we do pickled vegetables throughout the year, but our favorite part is when we can have pickled stipes, because they're super tasty. And this is sugar kelp. So it actually has a little bit of sweetness to it, which is delightful. There's all kinds of different kelps. I got to eat a really cool kelp in Alaska that tastes like cucumbers.
Cucumber kelp.
Yeah.
Love it.
Three-ribbed kelp. If you ever go to Alaska, have some three-ribbed kelp, and remember that you heard about it here first.
Mhm.
But it tastes just like cucumbers. It's crazy. But this stuff, it's nice and sweet. It's tasty. The blades themselves can be used in a lot of different ways. I have chefs that take this and will wrap fish, right? Wrap up fish and then put that in and cook it in the oven. And this kelp will help all the fat that's inside the fish stay with the fish, which means yummy, yummy flavor. And then at the end, they'll take this and they'll chop it into ribbons. And it's a side dish. Nice bright green color. There must be some bright green kelp around here somewhere. You can see some that's dried. It turns it into a very different color than what we see here on the line. But this it'll be dried and used as an additive in all kinds of different stuff. This is the part of the kelp that we use to make burgers, burger meat. And this is actually my favorite thing to use in my lasagna at home.
Yeah.
which is yummy.
What do kelp burgers taste like?
So the kelp burger that we make tastes like whatever kind of spice you put in, to be fair, right?
Well, so the kelp's kind of hidden in there a little
Yeah,
bit.
it isn't like there's this big fishy flavor, big kelpy flavor.
Mhm.
It really takes seasonings the way you want it to.
Yep.
But the thing that's nice is it has a great texture, and the flavor is like almost like the flavor of meat. You know how you get that depth of flavor with
Yeah.
with like a beef? You get that with kelp too, which
Kind
is
of
really nice.
savory.
Yeah, very
Mhm,
savory.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's a big misconception with seaweed is that it's always going to taste like fishy or like oceany. And some seaweeds, like kelp in particular, it's very light, tastes really yummy. So it's a good thing to put in burgers and sauces and lasagnas. Yeah.
I have friends that make salsa.
Ooh, kelp salsa.
Kelp salsa,
Yeah.
very, very good. I have some friends out on the West Coast that make they actually take bull kelp, which has stipes that are, so here's the stipe, right? But that stipe, some of the stipes are like as big as my wrist. And they chop it up and they bread it and they make onion rings,
Ooh.
which tasty bar snack right there. Not that I go to bars, sorry. Tasty restaurant snack. Yep,
Yeah.
yummy. It's a fantastic food and there's a lot of different ways to use it. And I'm guessing that a lot of you guys like ice cream.
Oh
Ice
yeah.
cream's good.
I love ice cream.
Jax, is there anything from seaweed that goes into ice cream?
There is a seaweed ingredient that goes into ice cream. I love Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and if you get a carton of Ben and Jerry's ice cream and look at the ingredients, the last one will be a compound. It's called carrageenan. Kind of a weird word, kind of long, but that is actually a seaweed derived compound that helps to thicken the ice cream so it's not watery and helps to prevent freezer burn. So you're not getting icicles forming on your ice cream. So if you like ice cream, you've probably been eating some seaweed extracts. It's also found in toothpaste and chocolate milk. So
Yep.
all of those things, very cool.
All things that I like.
Yeah, toothpaste, chocolate milk, ice cream.
Yep.
And Ken, so I'm curious, why do people farm kelp? So obviously for food, to make money, but are there other reasons why kelp farmers are excited about farming kelp?
Absolutely. So the getting paid and making money thing is important because every business needs to be economically sustainable. But from an environmental standpoint, this kelp is doing all of its work. It's growing. And what it's doing is it's taking carbon and nitrogen out of the water.
So just right into the blade.
Yeah. And it's actually making this water a better place for oysters to live and shellfish to live as it's making amazing food.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to use fertilizer. We don't have to water this stuff because it's growing in the water already. When you think about food production, there's very little strain on our environment to grow this food. And actually, it's helping the environment. And I can't think of any case where it's not, actually. So it's brilliant from that standpoint. I know all of you guys are concerned with global warming and stuff like that. This is a way that we can all help. It's just by growing some of this stuff and then eating it. So.
And this is a cool spot for a virtual field trip because, you talked about some of the other benefits that kelp has with other organisms that grow in water. Yep. And we're in a spot where there's kelp being cultivated, but there's also mussels and oysters nearby too. Yep, so absolutely. That's a really cool interaction there.
Yeah, we can actually see right there is an oyster boat, right? And there's other people that are if you look back there, you can see some oyster farming equipment. Aquaculture is really happening on the Damariscotta River, and this is just one part of it. And it all fits in together really well.
Yeah, seaweed's such a cool part of that. I have to mention, because I feel like, we're talking about a lot of animals here. We're talking about mussels and oysters, but sometimes people think that kelp is a plant. Is kelp a plant, Ken?
It's not a plant.
It's not a plant.
Is it a mammal?
It's not a mammal.
No. It's a lizard.
So now you guys are all probably sitting there. It's not a lizard, thinking, okay, well then what is kelp? Because obviously we talked about how it photosynthesizes, right? So that's kind of plant-like, and it definitely looks plant ish, but it doesn't have any flowers and it doesn't actually have any roots. Even though these look like roots, they're just actually grabbing on. Yeah, that's a perfect. So that's that holdfast. It's going to be like a grippy. And it really doesn't, there's no root activity. There's no transport systems. This looks like a stem, but it's not really a stem. So seaweeds are protists, which mean that they are photosynthesizing and that they have a nucleus in their cells, but they're not true plants. So when people call seaweed a plant, it's easy to call it a plant because it does a lot of the same things, but it's actually not a plant, which I think is pretty cool. And one of the coolest things, and one of the most obvious ways that we see kelp in particular not being a plant, would be baby kelp. Do you want to tell them about baby kelp? What does it do?
We could sing the song.
What is it? Baby kelp song.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't sing. I should actually never be allowed to sing because it'll always degrade.
You are on camera. Don't forget.
It will degrade. It will degrade like kelp does.
Yeah.
I'll let you talk about baby kelp.
Okay. Well, so baby kelp, and I don't know if we have any pieces here that are going to be having the reproductive area, but basically, baby kelp will form on this blade, and then they are released, and they're called spores. So you know how we call plants, they're seeds, and kelp and seaweeds, they're called spores. And these spores actually swim on their own. So if you were to see them under a microscope, they would kind of be swimming around all by themselves. So next time you're at the beach or swimming around kelp, you might just be swimming next to baby kelps.
Yeah.
And eventually they swim and they hit this small line here, and then they start growing from there, which is pretty cool. So that's a great way of knowing that seaweed is not a plant because it's swimming around on its own with you.
So we could talk a little bit about that sorus tissue though. Because
Yeah.
you guys will see this at the beach. So when you're at the beach, you pick up seaweed, you wrap yourself in seaweed. I like to put it as a sash, but everybody has different uses for seaweed at the beach.
Great.
Yeah.
Great accessory.
Great accessory.
We have a lot of material to work with here today.
You can, wear it like a neck gaiter.
Yeah, so it's not just for food, it's also fashion.
Yep. But however when you're hanging out with your kelp and playing with kelp, sometimes down the center of this is a really dark stripe. So right now, this is very, very clear, right? There's no sorus tissue there. But sometimes you'll see that dark stripe, and that's that reproductive tissue that I like to call them kelplings.
Yeah, it looked like a shaft.
That's more fun than spores.
Ken, I'm a scientist. You have to use the right term.
I like to use the fun words. So that's where the kelplings will come from. And that's kind of what we do in the nursery too, to create that seed is and I usually am the one who dives for that, right? So I'll dive down in the water with all my scuba gear on, and I'll be looking at all the seaweed, looking for that dark stripe. And when I find it, I bring it back up and everybody goes, hooray! And then we bring it back to the nursery and we dry it out, sort of like it went on a beach. And then we distress it a little bit. And then we put it into the tanks with these, with all the seed string, and the kelplings, spores, start swimming around in there, and they'll actually settle out onto that string.
Yeah.
And that's how we can get it out of here on the farm.
Cool. Okay, so we talked about some of the farming process, what it goes into. We talked about how baby kelps are born. Let's talk about problems. So
I got problems.
Problem time.
Are we talking about seaweed problems?
Yeah, just seaweed
Okay.
problems
Okay.
for
Good.
now.
Okay.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that seaweed farmers have?
So probably the biggest problem that we face right now is I'll say weather. So right now we're out here and it's kind of windy, but we're okay because we're tied up on this line, which is great. When it comes time to put this little tiny line on this big line, if there's any wind at all, it makes it incredibly difficult. So that's a big challenge. And then when it's time for harvest, this beautiful, beautiful food does not like to be dry. It doesn't like to be warm.
Yeah.
And you can actually see
it's here.
Yeah, this has only been out of the water for a little bit, and you can see some of it is starting to dry out already. So
Lighter color.
we have to work pretty fast, and there's ways that we deal with that. We spend a little bit of money on ice, and we can ice stuff up. We harvest what can be processed in a certain amount of time, because once it goes from here, it isn't like We then ship it to a supermarket in Chicago. It needs to be stabilized, which is the next step in the process. And there's different ways of stabilizing this so that it can be great food. Sometimes it gets dried, sometimes it gets frozen.
There's some dried right here on the
Yep.
bill.
Yep.
Kind of see, maybe from the last harvest there, so that nice
Yep.
dried kelp.
And at that point, it's stable and can go in a bag and
Mhm. Good eat.
can
Yep.
go home with Ken. Yep. It all is. It's yummy.
Cool. Maya, I want to check in. Are there any questions from the audience?
We have a question about how to harvest kelp. So could you talk a little bit about the harvesting?
Sure. I'm gonna go over here and get a knife.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We need
Fun-
tools.
Our cameraman can follow you as you're
So
getting it.
this is actually all kelp is harvested. There's not just one way to harvest kelp, but let's talk about harvesting this kelp that we have in front of us. So my main customer only wants this part. So the first thing we do is we take, my boat is 23 feet long, and when we lift this kelp up, we lift up 20 feet of kelp, which if we're going to translate that to this kelp today, that's like 180 pounds. We'll lift up into the air.
Pretty heavy, even
Yeah.
getting it up here. I mean, we did this before, the cameras were
Yep.
rolling, but it's pretty tough to get it out of the water.
And then we'll go down the line and we'll cut just the blade off, and we put that into a tote and we pile it all up. And then we're left with just the stipes, right? So we're cutting the blades off and we get to just the stipes. And once we've got a rope where it's just stipes, I will take this and we'll cut the stipes off. And you've seen us eating these. What we'll actually do is we'll take this and put it into a really big cooler. And the chef at my restaurant actually processed probably the equivalent, like if you're putting into 5-gallon buckets, like 8 or 9 5-gallon buckets of these stipes to make them into pickles. And then I have some other customers that want some of these stipes now because they saw how beautiful they were. And so we'll be taking these and we'll cut them out into little pieces like about this big and put them into 5-gallon buckets.
It cuts really easy too.
Yeah. And we'll chop it all up, put it in 5-gallon buckets and deliver those to restaurants where they'll use those as a fresh seaweed, which is honestly the nicest way to use this. We just, when we haul out, last year, Maine did what? 1.4 million pounds.
Over 1 million. Yeah.
That's a lot of pounds.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's more than
That's a lot of this stuff for
Yeah.
sure. Even
that's
this, it's like
that's more than even Jax can lift.
that is more than even me.
Yep.
And so this would be like what it looks like once it's all harvested,
Yeah.
right?
So
And then,
then we're left with that, and those holdfasts and stuff. Yeah, they have very little value. Although I do have a bunch of customers that feed that to their chickens, feed that to their pigs, mix it into their farms and their gardens. So I'll probably harvest from this farm about 1,000 pounds of that and deliver it to various places because we hate to waste anything.
yeah.
And the more of that we can take out of the river, the better.
Yeah. And this is great stuff for plants and gardens and pets, really like this. So that's nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is fun to throw though.
Yeah. This is what we were throwing behind Maya before. So I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to throw it right at the camera. Ready? Oh, almost ready. Oh, that was good.
Perfect.
That was
All right. I think we have some more questions, right?
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
have lots of questions. Thank you, everybody. for the
That's
questions.
great.
So we're gonna just run through them. So far, we've got about 15. So we'll see how many we can get through. So the first question here, from Ms. Barrett's classroom is: how does kelp help clean water? What is that process?
Where is Miss
Water.
Barrett's classroom?
I don't
I mean,
know.
that's like a question for a question, but
Yeah.
So I think as us, people that are concerned with the environment, the big problem we have, right, is that things are out of balance. And there's a lot of nitrogen going into this river because of a lot of different reasons. But like one of them is people really like to have green lawns and they add nitrogen to their lawns and then it rains and then it runs into the river. And then the kelp says, I really like nitrogen.
Yeah, loves it.
And it picks it all up and then we can eat it.
Yeah. And it's growing super fast. So it's really, really efficient and really quick at getting that nitrogen, phosphorus, or carbon. Obviously, carbon is the building block here. So you've heard about oceans and the oceans being a carbon sink. So seaweed is doing a really, really effective job, and kelp in particular, a really good job of scooping up that carbon and turning it into beautiful blades. And then also producing oxygen on the back end. So same thing as you can think about with like trees or plants. They're putting more oxygen into the water, which is going to help those other little critters in the ocean. Yeah. That was a good question.
All right,
Yeah.
are you guys ready
Take
for
that.
another one?
Yep.
So ready for
Okay,
another one.
and
maybe every
Eric's
question I'm
classroom is
gonna have
actually
is
in
another
Ken's
piece.
hometown, Freeport.
Every question we have,
Freeport,
I'm
yeah.
adding another piece
Howdy.
of kelp.
For every question, Jax is going to put on a piece of kelp.
Yeah.
All right, so our
So
next
keep asking.
question is from Ms. Ripa's classroom, which is about the economics of seaweed farming. So her class is wondering if you could talk a little bit about how much it costs to start a seaweed farm, and then what people make after that.
Yeah, money, money, money.
Yeah, which is a good question, right?
It's a really good question.
So if you're starting a seaweed farm in Maine, the first thing you have to do is you have to approach the state and say, I want to have a seaweed farm. And you go through that process with the state. And once they say, yes, go and have a seaweed farm, you're going to have to buy let's talk about this one line, right?
Yep.
I'm going to have to buy 2 anchors.
Right. One
So,
on either end of
Yeah.
this.
So that's going to be $600.
Mhm.
And then that is enough for me to have a 400-foot line. So I'm gonna have to buy 1 seed spool. Depends on where you buy it. If you bought it from the Maine Family Sea Farm Cooperative this year, it would have been $200 for 400 feet.
Yeah, that's
Which
pretty
is
standard.
Yeah, which is a great price. So we've spent that. We have to buy this really cool rope, unless we've got a friend that's a lobsterman who's like ready to get rid of some old line. But let's assume we have to buy that. So that's going to be like another $40.
Yep.
And now we've got to buy a bunch of buoys, another couple $100.
Yeah.
So we're probably up around, by the time we're all told and we've paid for gas and
Mhm.
and everything else, it's probably about $1,000 to put in that 400 feet.
Mhm. Yep. And what about for people? So you obviously have a boat.
Yeah.
Right. But I think the economics of it would be a lot different if you don't have a boat, because I'm betting that this is a nice boat, Ken.
This is a nice boat.
But this is a little more than $1,000.
This is more than $1,000. And it's part of my business, right?
Yep.
So it's a capital asset.
Yep.
So when I look at this boat and think about buying this boat, it doesn't get applied to just one season. It's going to last for more seasons than just one.
Yep.
A boat, actually, I capitalize over 30 years. So I take the price of this boat, divide it by 30, and each year I say I've got to pay for that much of my boat.
Mhm, mhm. And
This boat was about 45,000, so that's what, $1,500 a year.
Yep. And I think that's a big reason why we see a lot of people who are kelp farmers. They also grow other things or fish for other stuff too.
I have a very good friend that's he has a mooring service. It
Yep.
does moorings, but that's a great boat for harvesting kelp.
Right. Because, obviously kelp is seasonal.
Yep.
It's only happening in the winter, and then you wouldn't want a nice boat like this to go to waste in the summer. So we do see a lot of kelp farmers
Yep.
who also have either are lobstermen, oyster farmers, mooring businesses, mussel farmers. There's a big overlap there.
Yep.
So that makes the economics of it a lot more possible versus if you're starting out without a boat or without those businesses, you'd be looking at a much higher starting cost.
Yep.
Yeah.
And going back to all that too, all those costs like the anchor, the rope, the buoys, all that stuff except for the seed.
Yeah.
That's going to last at least 3 years. So we take just a third of that and apply it against our crop each year.
Yeah.
But 400 feet, if I can grow 400 feet and I can grow 5 pounds per foot, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. If I can grow 5 pounds per foot,
Yes.
that's 2,000 pounds of kelp.
Yeah.
And if I'm really good at selling it, I'm going to get $1 a pound. So $2,000. So I'm going to make a little bit of money, but I am not a rich man, kelp farmer.
Kelp millionaire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be a kelp millionaire, all you have to do is grow 10 million pounds of kelp. Yeah.
Cool. Next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. 7 million pounds of kelp. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right, so from Ms. Howard's classroom, we have a couple of questions I think can kind of be answered together. So,
Peace.
her class wants to know, what is the most seaweed you've ever harvested? When did you start farming kelp, and why do you like farming kelp?
Oh,
Ooh.
well, first of all, why do I like farming kelp? I'm going to start with that. I love two things about farming kelp. One, I love kelp, and I love the idea that, you know, I could make food in an environmentally positive way. The other part of it is my kelp friends are my best friends in the world. So that is amazing to me. So the people I get to hang out with in my office are probably number one. Number two is
Pretty good office.
it's an incredible process, and you know, I feel like I'm doing good while I'm supporting my family. So I started, this idea occurred in 2018. I put my first kelp in the water in 2019.
Mhm.
I don't know if you were there the day that I put the kelp in the water, but boy, she was out of my boat a bunch of times during that year and really saved my bacon when that thing called the pandemic happened. And then what was the last question?
How much have you
Oh.
harvested?
The biggest harvest day that I've ever been a part of is 11,000 pounds in a day.
That's a good day.
But I have done on this boat, hand harvested 7,000 pounds, which is a ripping day too.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to imagine when you're harvesting, the whole boat is getting filled up with this kelp, right? It's coming in, it's going in like totes or big bags. And so you're kind of limited based on the space that you have to harvest in the boat, how much your boat can really carry.
Yeah.
So
And this
that's
boat,
kind of
this is kind of a cool boat, and it was actually made to hold kelp. But when you put 7,000 pounds of kelp on this boat, the kelp is this high,
yeah.
and the boat is a lot lower in the water and does not go very fast.
Yeah.
But you can do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, are you guys ready for another
Yeah,
question?
all the seaweed is flying off me, but I'm really
Yeah.
trying to add pieces. I'm just
so
actually gonna.
we have a
crawl
question
into
from Miss
this.
Bowman's classroom. I think her class has had some of the same questions about how long you've been harvesting. But they're also wondering, so when you go out to harvest kelp for a day, how long do you spend out on the water?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So a lot of that depends on what my goal for that day is. And sometimes where my kelp is going to dictates how long I can work. One of the places that we deliver to is the Portland Fish Exchange. And we have to have our kelp to the Portland Fish Exchange by no later than 3 o'clock. They really want it by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So like when you guys are getting out of school. But on those days, we'll start at about 4 in the morning. So what's that? 8 hours? So that's not a hard thing.
Yeah.
If we are harvesting to harvest, and we're going to land it at the Freeport Town dock, and we're not delivering until the next morning. I have started at 5 and finished at 7 that next night. So that's what, 14 hours?
Yeah, long time. Yeah.
Yep.
Because you really don't want to. I mean, you don't want to have the kelp sitting out of the water for all that long, right? So like that's why 8 hours, 14 hours, still good, but if you start going over that,
Yep.
it's gonna start. The kelp starts to get a little sad.
And some days early on in the season, I'll go out and I'll harvest like just for a restaurant or for my restaurant.
Mhm.
And I'm only out for like 45 minutes. I love those days.
Quick,
Yeah.
cut that kelp,
Yeah.
get out of there.
So we have two questions that are related to things you just talked about.
Cool.
So one is very quick question. Ken, what's your restaurant called that you keep talking about?
Oh, it's a Freeport
More
Oyster
questions?
Bar.
Yeah.
It's an oyster bar in Freeport. So Freeport Oyster Bar.
Okay. And then the other
Really good
question,
kelp tacos.
really good
Really
kelp
good kelp
tacos. Yeah.
tacos.
Another question that we have kind of, so you were just talking about how kelp is in the water for, you don't want it to be out of the water for that long. So this person is wondering, this is Miss Barrett's classroom. Also, they're wondering kind of about how long can kelp last before it kind of goes bad? And like, does it go stale? Does it, like, what happens to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, you heard Ken mention that the kelp gets processed. And by that, we are talking about it is either going to be frozen or dried or refrigerated, because obviously, it's coming out of the ocean. It's still seafood in that sense. So it's going to go pretty quick. If you were to take this and leave this kind of kelp in your refrigerator, it's probably going to last about as long as spinach does. So, you know, a week, a little more than a week. The best way to know if kelp is still good is sight and smell. So, in the same way that you would have maybe like old lettuce, you'd be like, "Ooh, no, thank you," kind of gross.
Yeah.
Kelp is the same way. You know, when it's fresh and good to eat, it's gonna have this really nice texture. You know, it's like pretty firm. It's like I'm pulling on that pretty good. It's not gonna be slimy. Once it starts to change and you start to see those things change, then that's when you know it's probably not good to eat anymore. That being said, dried kelp and frozen kelp will last a really long time. So dried kelp is shelf stable for a year or more. Frozen kelp is stable as long as you keep it in an appropriate refrigerator.
We talked about that in
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah.
And I just had some of my 2019 kelp last week.
Yeah. So dried kelp, I mean, it will.
I have a little bit every year. I'm going to
Yeah.
see how long I can do it.
It'll last for a very, very long time. But fresh, it's definitely like, you know, same thing as a lettuce or a kale, where you probably want to eat it pretty soon after harvesting.
All right, ready for the next question?
Yep.
Yes. This is so
All
good.
right, so we have a
So
question from Emily
Maybe
at
guys.
Connor School, and they're wondering how cold is the water when you're harvesting kelp?
Mm,
Super warm out here right now.
yeah. Um, and it's actually the water temperature that kind of dictates when we harvest. So this, ideally, we want the water temperature to be below 50 degrees. But you know, this winter we had water temperatures as low as 29 on my farms, which means that yes, frozen salt water.
Yeah.
Um,
Very
so,
cold.
but when we're harvesting, it's usually right around 50. So like when you pull the seaweed up, and if the wind's blowing towards you, you're getting 50-degree water splash.
Yeah. And I think at that 50-degree mark, after that, once it starts to warm up after that, like once we get into June, July, August, you know, summer temperatures, you start to see all of those little critters growing on the kelp that we probably don't really want to eat for food, right? So you'll see the kelp snail.
For yourself.
All right, maybe you want to eat them, but they add a little extra crunch.
Yeah.
And the kelp stops growing. So you're actually not having any more, you know, it kind of levels out. So you're just having more opportunities for other stuff to grow on your kelp, and you're not getting any more growth. So, you know, at that point, most folks will be harvesting it, but at that 50-degree temperature.
So to that point, probably right now, because this kelp is floating and it's not down underneath the water, if we look at this kelp line that's right here,
That's a great view.
we can actually see that see the light colored kelp? That's the kelp that's sunburned. So that's the stuff that I'm going to be ripping off the line and throwing back into the water. Or, you know, putting into the bag that's going to be spread and tilled into somebody's field. So right now there's less and less kelp harvest each day that passes.
Yep. Right. Because the bottom just kind of breaks off. So
Yeah.
that's another reason you want to get out and harvest it within that nice little harvest window we have right now.
Yep.
Okay, we have another question from Ms. Snow's classroom, 5th grade in Thomaston, and they're wondering what other jobs besides farming kelp are part of the kelp industry?
Ooh, that's a great question.
We have people that are managing these companies. We have accountants that have to count all the monies that you get for the kelplings.
Mhm.
We have scientists that are going to be out and, you know, doing nursery work and also doing new development. We keep
Plumbers, people who
Yeah.
work with tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we keep
Yep.
the wardens busy.
Yep.
You know, the Marine Patrol, they have to come out and check on us and make sure that we're safe and doing a good job.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that are involved in this industry on the outside, and then if you think about it, right downstream, we have people that are developing food, they're processing food,
It's so cool.
they're making food, and then I get to eat the food.
Right. So like, you know, everything from like every step of the process, there's a bunch of different jobs that go into that. So like whether you're interested in engineering or boats, like you might be curious about how you build the best kelp harvest boat out there. Not that this isn't it, but you
It's-
know.
I think this, I'm particular about this boat. And if you're interested in boat building, there's this crazy guy named Jesse Lowell. He's in Wisconsin. That's who you should talk to about this book.
Yeah, so you got, folks who do boat building and engineering the structure of farms you can think about if you're kind of interested in that. If you like being out on the water, obviously like farming, but also like, engine repair, all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I think about, obviously, I think a lot of people sometimes believe that you have to be a marine biologist to work on the ocean. And for some people that's true, but for others it's not. And so but we do have biologists that work in the space.
Yeah.
But we also have researchers, students, artists. I think about folks who design like even the packaging for kelp, right? So you can think about some of these kelp products that people aren't really familiar with eating it. So you have to make it look good, right?
Yep.
We know it looks good out here, but you got to make it look good in a package. So you might be drawing beautiful photos of kelp that would go on kelp burger packaging, or getting excited doing like samples, trials.
Yep.
There are so many people that work in this seaweed space. It's so cool. And so like I really feel like any interest you probably could find a space here in our kelp.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the end of the kelp harvest, we're keeping all the doctors and massage therapists busy. So there's
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah. And, like we run a food festival. Like there are so many fun opportunities. So being a kelp farmer is so cool, and that's not the only way to be involved in kelp either.
Absolutely not. And everybody should be involved in eating it. I totally agree.
So we have just a couple minutes left here.
Okay.
But I want to have maybe two more questions. So one of the questions is, what species of seaweed do we farm and sell in Maine?
How did we skip that one?
So related to that, which ones do you think taste the best?
Ooh.
So first of all, we should cover the fact that like we are farming seaweed, but there are also people whose job it is to go out and wild harvest seaweed.
Yep.
And what an amazing thing to responsibly forage on the coast of Maine and get kelp and all kinds of other seaweed. So we only right now, this is sugar kelp.
Yep. So you got sugar kelp here.
Yep. And we farm skinny kelp.
Yep.
And
it's a little bit more narrow, but look kind of like this.
Yeah, very similar.
Yep.
And there's Alaria, winged kelp, which is beautiful and great. And
three kelp.
Yeah, those are like the three that are really being farmed. There's a couple people that are playing around a little bit with dulse, which I think we'll start to see more of. And I actually am working on some farming of that, but inside, which is another little crazy thing to say for a different webinar. But,
different virtual field trip to the inside seaweed farm.
But those are the three primaries.
Yeah. And then we have a bunch of species. So Maine has about 200 species of seaweed, which is pretty cool. Most of them are you could try. Some of them taste better than others. We have about 10 that people really like to eat. We call those our sea veggies, right? So out of those, you can think of there's some red seaweeds like dulse or nori, which if you've ever had a sushi sheet, the flat sheet, that would be one of the species that we have here that we don't farm. We do wild harvest, but I think farms are pretty excited about trying it.
Yes.
Too. So in addition,
bring it on.
Yeah, we got the kelp thing down. But I'm excited about the different kinds of seaweeds that we'll be farming 10 years from now, because there's some tasty ones. They taste a lot different than kelp.
Yes, they do.
But they're all good in my book.
All right. I'm going to come back on camera.
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Here, you need some of this.
Yeah, for the
my kelp friend.
Yes.
I'm so proud.
So
of this
Ken,
kelp right now.
our last question from Hadley at Connor School. I think this one's for you specifically.
Okay.
Can you eat the whole fast?
Damn skippy.
I didn't eat the whole fast.
So
It's prettier, but
here's the whole fast. And oftentimes this is good habitat for a lot of things, so you don't know what you might get.
And this is why I asked Ken if you would eat the whole
You
fast.
can absolutely
So
eat
yes,
the whole
you
fast.
can.
yeah.
All right, so that kind of wraps up our time here, but I want to thank Jaclyn and Ken so much. And thank you again for coming. This has been a really fun webinar, and we look forward to connecting with you guys to learn more about seaweed soon. Woo! All right, happy Kelp Week.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.